Pulse wasn't just a nightclub. It was a place where people could come to feel welcome. It didn't matter who you were, who you wanted to be. You felt loved. This is what Pulse is now.
It was really important to me that people learned not only the story of what happened at Pulse that night, but also what you can do differently in your life to change the future, how we can become a better society, a better human race. That's why I began the foundation.
We are building a national memorial museum. It's part of our country's history, and it's our responsibility to see to it that this story and that the 49 are never forgotten. These museums and memorials aren't built for years. They're built for centuries. And what we're doing is more than just a memorial museum.
I hope that the memorial will bring people together from all walks of life, but I also hope that it can be a place of love.
As a family member, I said, I hope they turn this place into a museum.
The memorial is where you go to grieve, but the museum is where you go to learn.
I want people to come visit so they can take what happened here and pass it on.
I'm really excited about the educational opportunity of the museum and the wonderful things that the onePULSE Foundation is working on to build a stronger global community.
Well, my hope is that when they walk out, they've learned not only what happened on June 12th, but how to be a better human, that they will be able to spread the message that we will not let hate win. They will leave equipped how to do that.
The interim memorial now is built and it's amazing.
The pictures that are on the barrier wall are of love and support and unity, but mostly you'll see a community. A global community.
This is a magical place. It's always a rainbow, or you'll see a cloud look like an angel. It's peaceful.
People that ask if they should come to the memorial, I always recommend it.
It is so welcoming.
There are so many stories.
You can't help but feel the impact.
I think everyone should see this.
You'll be so happy that you did.
It gives you a lot of energy of how to go forward.
And it's a really beautiful cathartic experience.
We have over 300 people a day that visit, and people are coming from around the world. We have seen bands of children pull up to learn the story of what happened on this site.
And they're teaching kids that there's no difference between one another person. You always should love.
We found it really important that our angels were not just a name on a wall. And that's why we developed our scholarship program. We had 49 individual scholarships, each in the name of one of our angels, designated by their family members as a way to make sure that their stories lived on forever.
After visiting the memorial, we want people to feel like they're changed for the better, that they want to get involved because the goal is really to stop hate.
There are just so many ways that people can engage with the foundation, volunteering at our offices, helping us with our events, even just being a guide on site. It's an easy, simple way to be part of the solution.
Being a volunteer for the onePULSE Foundation, it's a life-changing experience.
Come out, check it out, and get involved. Go to the onePULSE Foundation website.
Right now, more than anything, funding is crucial.
Donate to the onePULSE Foundation to help us build the memorial site to honor all of them, to keep the memories going forever.
The story needs to be told over and over again.
Everybody's human. Treat everybody equally.
Love still wins, and the message is still alive and well.
It's going to change your life.
We will not let hate win.
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 Nosotros no dejaremos que el odio gane.
We will not let hate win.
We will not let hate win.
We will not let hate win.
Love is love, and we will not let hate win.
Pulse nightclub in Orlando was not just a place where people could be free to be themselves, but a place to find community and safety. To know that the essence of Pulse was shattered by a mass shooting and terrorist attack in our country remains just as unimaginable today as it was that night, June 12, 2016. The National Pulse Memorial and Museum is intended to preserve the heart of Pulse, a place where everyone was welcomed and loved. The memorial would be designed as a place to grieve, to honor lives taken and saved, as well as serve as a place to heal and learn. The museum will serve as a community space to tell the history of safe spaces, the tragedy of June 12, 2016, and the response and support of the world. I hope you'll join me in supporting the onePULSE Foundation and help build the National Pulse Memorial and Museum so that we never forget what happened to those precious lives that were taken. We won't let hate win.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Earl Crittenden, chair of the onePULSE Foundation Board of Trustees, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight for our third film screening this year. Our film screenings, called Conversation Starters, are part of a broader conversation series that is made possible through the generous contributions of our sponsors. We want to thank JP Morgan and Chase, Central Florida Foundation, Lockheed Martin, Orlando Utilities Commission, and Skanska USA Building, Inc. for making these contributions and screenings and courageous conversations with panelists possible. We continue to positively impact change at the individual, group, and community levels with this series. I hope you enjoy the film. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Earl Mowat, Vice President of Education with onePULSE Foundation.
Thank you, Earl, for your leadership and support. I'm Dr. Earl Mowat, Vice President of Education for the National Pulse Memorial and Museum. Our mission is to create and support a memorial that opens hearts, a museum that opens minds, educational programs that open eyes, and a legacy scholarships that open doors. A few months ago, we welcomed our second class of 49 legacy scholarship recipients. We awarded more than $236,000 to undergraduate and graduate students who are carrying on the hope, dreams, and aspirations of our 49 angels. Recipients, they come from all over the United States and have a common thread of community service, leadership, and advocacy. We're proud to have one of these recipients, Amelia León, contributing on our panel discussion later this evening. In June, we reached a major milestone when President Biden signed the bill designating Pulse nightclub as a national memorial. Now, that having designation means that the Pulse nightclub site will always be recognized by the federal government and honored as a historically significant event. Our educational program under onePULSE Academy officially launched with our first conversation starter film screening of 90 days. We followed that with a screening of the editor's cut of Disarm Hate. We are thrilled to partner nationally with amazing writers and directors to showcase their important work and to have discussion afterwards. You'll be introduced later to our incredible panelists who will be leading us in discussion tonight after we screen the film. We're so excited to bring you this amazing film, From Selma to Stonewall, Are We There Yet? Directed and co-executive produced by Marilyn Bennett. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to Marilyn tonight, and she is here to offer her welcome and opening comments.
Thank you, Dr. Earl. I so appreciate your introduction and including us in this conversation. I have always just marveled of how what has come from this unfathomable tragedy, and it's not even coming out of that, it's surviving. It's, you know, how do you even go on from there? What I've appreciated is the action, the verb in the taglines of "We will not let hate win." That means we take action. We will not. And outlove hate. That too is a call to action and a call to how we are in this world from day to day. I'm not going to say much about the film at all because I want everyone to be able to watch it with a clean slate. And so we'll just go with the film, From Selma to Stonewall, Are We There Yet?
Because I keep saying that this is an American story.
Yes.
A very American. It's an American as apple pie. Knowing that a group is gathered for the same reason, you know, there's an immediate kind of solidarity.
And the most gated neighborhood in the world is the human heart. And legislation can only do so much. There's an interior work, there's a soul work that must be done.
The visibility of police abuse of black men, I liken that to the police abuse of the first people who gathered at Selma. That Bloody Sunday was a police riot.
There may be some in this auditorium There may be some here today that will be homosexual in the future. Because 1 out of 3 of you will turn queer. And if we catch you involved with a homosexual, your parents are going to know about it first. And you will be caught. Don't think you won't be caught.
One of my dearest friends in the civil rights movement, he said, Martin Luther King did not die, nor did we march for 2 men to sleep together.
That the homophobia in the black community is real. It's most profound in the church and needs to be addressed.
If there is a Stonewall, it's because of black trans sisters who were out there raising hell and making noise.
These young LGBT homeless youth off the streets. Get them off the streets.
About 40% of the homeless population identify as LGBTQ.
To say, in spite of the fact that I'm poor and black and dark-skinned and gay, and I am a human being. I am loved by God. As the psalmist says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made.
Just as there were flaws in the civil rights movement, there are flaws in this movement that I'm identifying as taking us there. But then it is in the intersections. It is in the intersections that we will find the new world.
My generation, we were raised to hate gay people. If you was gay in the black community, you stood a good chance of getting beat up just for being gay. Now, I grew up in the South. If you was black in the South, you stood a good chance of being beat up just because you were black. There are some unique fundamental dynamics that tie us together, whether we like it or not. Discrimination is something that black people know about. We know what it means to be discriminated against. There's no difference between the discrimination that we face today and have faced historically and the discrimination that gay people face today and have faced historically. Discrimination is discrimination.
I'm Gil Caldwell, a retired United Methodist minister. I describe myself as a civil rights movement foot soldier, for I was involved in all of the national movements from the 1957 prayer pilgrimage to the Poor People's Campaign in 1968. I was a part of the Selma to Montgomery March. I was there for the Tuesday following Bloody Sunday, called Turnaround Tuesday, and then I was at the end of the march as we marched into Montgomery. So my civil rights involvement, of course, is pretty extensive, being in those important places. We bonded when, in fact, you initiated the idea of people of color and sort of identifying this missing community. And I think in your doing that, that authenticated you in terms of my own thinking. That I think one is always looking for, I guess it's interesting, one is, as a black person, one is always looking for white people who seem to get it, who seem to understand it. And I wonder if there is a parallel in the gay community, if gay persons are always looking for straight persons who give the appearance of understanding it.
I'm Marilyn Bennett. I have a Master of Divinity from SMU's Perkins School of Theology. I am an author. My first book was We Were Baptized to Claiming God's Grace for Lesbians and Gays. I've been in nonprofit work for 25 years, and I am a longtime activist and organizer. Gil and I met when I was the executive director for the Reconciling Ministries Network. He and I were working on changing policies of the United Methodist Church on sexual orientation and gender identity. We were working in a coalition for the General Conference 2000, and we were arrested together, and that's really where we bonded.
We, of course, before that visit, we'd been writing letters to each other, simply talking back and forth. I began calling her younger sister. She called me elder brother. It was a way of relating. We sometimes talk of ourselves as an odd couple.
In the 1990s, when I was coming out, I was so aware of
being a lesbian and kind of hyper aware of what people were thinking of me because of that. And today, I don't feel that so much. There are definitely moments where when I do come out to someone, I sense their discomfort or their unhappiness or judgment or whatever. But I'm in a much stronger place.
Marilyn had the idea of us going to Selma. She felt that it was important to sort of revisit at least one of the places where I had been in my civil rights activity. And that was a marvelous and moving moment for me, where I went to Brown Chapel AME Church, where, of course, the march started.
Participation in the Selma march was very important. First of all, after that awful Bloody Sunday, many of us around the nation got words, I guess really Western Union messages from Martin King and SCLC to come to Selma on the Tuesday following Bloody Sunday, and so I was one of those. I was in Boston at the time, and I, of course, traveled with a number of people. One of those was the Reverend James Reeb, the Unitarian minister who was beaten that Tuesday night and later died from that. And then I returned, of course, for the end of the march as we marched into Montgomery. Selma was important because we were about voting rights. That was a concern. The absence of blacks on the voting logs in Alabama was a matter of real concern, and therefore we were involved in simply protesting the exclusion of persons from the voting rights because of who they were racially. And therefore we accomplished, of course, the signing of the Voting Rights Bill, that unfortunately has been rescinded to some degree by both the Supreme Court and the Congress. But that was a very important part of my life, and I will never forget that experience.
But we realize that somehow our faith allows us to get back up, because no matter how hard we're knocked down, we're standing up on the inside. And so hold on, friends. Hold on. Hold on.
Okay, I'm Frederick Davey. I serve as the Executive Vice President here at Union Theological Seminary, where I am essentially the Chief Administrative Officer of the school. In 2007, I was asked to volunteer for the President's campaign for the 2008 elections, and worked on the faith aspect of that campaign, helped to write a speech that the President gave in 2008 in Zanesville, Ohio, which was his statement about faith and the federal government, and how he, as president, if he were to be elected, would work with faith institutions. After the campaign, I worked on the transition team doing agency reviews on the faith-based programs in the various agencies, and then was appointed by the president to the White House Faith Council. It was actually called the White House Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. You know, I think it's important on all of these institutions, particularly religious institutions, especially when it comes to the LGBT community, to remember that they had a theology of racism. That they bought into that people bought into with all their hearts and souls, and they were absolutely convinced that this was what God wanted.
On racism.
On racism.
Exactly.
That the races should be separate, that blacks and browns were inferior, that God had cursed Ham, so you have this darker race. I mean, people believe that. In their hearts they believed it, and sophisticated people believed it, and they use all kinds of theology and scripture to justify it. They should be aware that they're doing the same thing when it comes to homosexuality.
My name is Darnell Moore. I am a senior correspondent at Mike News, also co-managing editor of The Feminist Wire. I'm a writer, teacher, organizer. So many, I think, movements of today attempt to do work, the easy work, I think, of presenting platforms without ever really engaging people that the platforms speak on behalf of. I mean, I got to a point where, I had to sort of create a theology that works for me. That is, if hell is the lot that you think I'm going to receive because of some sin, I'd rather go to hell than to a heaven. And Desmond Tutu has said this, and so many others, right?
Exactly.
But that's where I am.
Exactly.
I'm willing to hold the church accountable because people's lives are at stake, not just membership. I'm talking about the lives of I'm tired of talking to people who have considered and contemplated and tried to take their life because they've been taught to believe that God hates them. This is a type of violence, a theological violence, that I don't think we can be soft with, and I think that we need to be outright and calling out.
When you are in pain and you keep silent, they will kill you and say that you enjoyed it. And that's always resonated with me,
And that's Zora
Neale Hurston, yes. Hey everyone, I'm Kiara St. James, the current executive director of NYTAG, New York Transgender Advocacy Group. I'm originally from Beaumont, Texas. I grew up in a very religious household, Church of God in Christ, COGIC, for a lot of folks who know that term. So there's a lot of gender policing that went on in my household. I remember the pastor tending to talk about homosexuality in such a negative tone. And then when AIDS came on the scene, it was like God's eradicating the land from these homosexuals. And so that was indoctrinated into me for the longest time. And so even as a child, knowing that I was different, I also knew that I couldn't really act out in a way that I wanted to, And the times that I did, I got punished for it, I still have the burns on me from iron burns, different things that were done to cast those demons out of me, So it was traumatic to a good degree. Well, I just feel it's important that people have to understand when you talk about the trans community, it's important not to talk about it like we're a new phenomenon. Talk about it, know our history, understand that we've been here since the beginning of time, before Judeo-Christianity, before Islam, before any of these other modern religions, there was a place for folks who we now call trans, whether you call us Two-Spirit, Fafa Fini, whatever the names they had for us back in the day. There was a role that we played that we weren't tolerated, we were accepted as an integral part of society. And we have to get back to that. We have to get back to understanding it's not for you to tolerate me, it's really for you to understand my special place and my community's special place in your community and in the community of mankind and of human beings, that we have a place, and we should not be seen as an afterthought.
And at the same time, I've also been very adamant about speaking to my Black communities about its need to also recognize queer and trans people within its ranks, not only who are living among us, but who are also leading movements. So no, we aren't there. I don't want to dismiss the work that has been done by our ancestors, particularly our Black, queer, and trans folk.
Yes, yeah.
If there is a Stonewall, it's because of Black trans sisters who were out there raising hell and making noise.
Stonewall was a natural explosion of rage that had been building for many decades, and that showed a change in how people felt about themselves, that they felt that these conditions were no longer acceptable, and they expressed that.
There, so nothing comes out of nothing. So when I think about what happened in June of 1969 at the Stonewall, I view that as something that was going to happen someday. It just happened to be that was the place and that was the night when it happened, because it was the tinder had been laid. It was just a question of when it was going to catch a spark and ignite.
There was no entrance here. It was blocked off. There was no back room and no upstairs.
And they built a small hallway with a book at the end of it that when Frankie Shades would open the door to let you in, you had to sign the book. Nobody had ID. I would Fenwick Fingernail. Somebody would write Elizabeth II. Somebody would write Mary Dugan, Donabella Beads. They'd write whatever you said. They tried to get off as saying it was a private club, but the cops, they had no liquor license, no nothing.
Okay.
Now, normally when the neighborhood precinct would raid the bar, they'd either throw us out or line us up, and then we'd give them our phony name, Fenwick Fingernail. Sometimes they took us to jail overnight, and they put us all in one big cell, and then a judge in the next day would either say, you're wasting my time, case dismissed, or you're a bunch of perverts, $20 fine.
I mean, again, when you think about it, it's so ironic to think that the folks who sort of like lit the spark, I mean, it didn't start the gay rights movement. God knows before that you had folks who were much more buttoned down, you know, the Mattachine Society and those folks, Frank Kameny and those folks. But the reality is that the thing that really popped the LGBT, gay rights movement in 1969 with Stonewall, they were street kids. They were street kids.
The people who threw the first punches were drag queens, and many of them were Black and Latino, because the police felt them as being easier targets than the more male-identified men that would fight back. And so often when you hear people talk about Stonewall, you see it as being a white gay phenomenon in our community where these white gay men did all of this fighting back. And some of them did fight back, but some of the first retaliation came from Black and Latino drag queens and lesbians because they got tired of it.
Okay.
So when you talk about Stonewall, those words mean something globally. And so it has risen to this place of symbolizing something. So it becomes an element that when you say it, it says something about a movement, even if you don't know what all the details are. Oh, got to go to Stonewall, it started at Stonewall. When you ask young people, do you know what the Stonewall was? That's kind of like where you enter the story. And that is what kind of makes the place important.
Everyone in this room has seen profound paradigm shifts in American culture. Even though we're backwards now, and we're much more right-wing than we were then, we have still seen cultural change. And I know that, you know, when I first came out, gay people, I myself was kicked out of a restaurant on Bleecker Street for kissing a girl because there was no gay rights bill in New York City. Right, and today, you know, gay rights are part of the Democratic Party platform.
I thought I'd never see this day. Love is love, and sometimes justice comes like a thunderbolt. You can go on a destination wedding to Alabama or anywhere you want.
Just the same love, same hopes, same dreams, just different names.
So we've seen these enormous changes. And the question is, how do they occur? How does change get made?
Whenever we are dealing with a biblical text, we might want to call the public health department, because biblical texts have public health implications. When the Bible is brought into the public square, as it ought, I have no problem with that at all, we must realize that the balance of power and literally people's welfare hangs in the balance. As one of my teachers taught me, biblical interpretation is an act of politics.
Well, the battle is heating up tonight between the Navy and a former midshipman who is gay.
The Navy's ordered a former class president at the Naval Academy to reimburse the Pentagon for his education, reimbursed to the tune of $70,000. But Tommy Watkins says he was forced to resign from the Naval Academy, and he's fighting that bill in court.
My name is Dr. Tommy Lee Watkins Jr. I'm a native of Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm a seminarian, a senior here at General Theological Seminary. I am from the Episcopal Diocese of Alabama, and I'm pursuing a Master's in Divinity as a means to becoming ordained next year as the first openly gay African-American ordained in the Diocese of Alabama. From 1993 to 1997, I was a midshipman at the United States Naval Academy. And my senior year, I was forced to resign due to my sexual orientation. And so the government, told me that I had to leave Annapolis and I owed them the cost of my education. And because they gave me an honorable discharge, they decided to stick me with this bill. And I subsequently had a long 3-year legal fight and subsequently won. The issue was, how can you make me leave under your prejudicial policy and make me pay this money back? Mm-hmm. Because if I could serve, I would serve, And so they dropped the order for recoupment, and at that point, I, had no more legal challenges, and so I won the lawsuit in essence, but it cost me, the church I was working at fired me because I wouldn't marry a woman.
I think it's very important for us to ramp up our ability to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I do not think that there are enough people in our country who genuinely understand the brutalities, the centuries of brutalities that were visited upon African Americans.
One that's inclusive also had to do with all of the hell that I had to face as a gender nonconforming child, a black boy growing up in the hood where it was expected for me to perform a certain type of black masculinity. I was nearly burnt to death as a child. I was a teen and was unfortunately doused with gasoline.
So I'm so accustomed to the racism and the sexism, and I know you probably think, oh wow, that's a shame for you, but it's not, because it makes me stronger, because I anticipate the hate already, the discrimination in some kind of form, and it makes me be able to deal with it better as a lesbian, even though there are conflicts during the process of accepting that I was a lesbian, because I was raised in a Baptist Christian home. I had an internal struggle I had to deal with.
I do know from my personal experience and from what I've seen around me that the racism in the LGBT community is real, and it remains problematic and continues to need to be addressed. That the homophobia in the black community is real. It's most profound in the church and needs to be addressed.
And that's why around these conversations of marriage equality, I've often asked myself, why in so many ways are African Americans and many of our faith communities so willing to be prophetic and progressive as it relates to our politics, but as it relates to issues around sexuality and those mores and marriage, there seems to be a much more conservative ethic. And I think we won't be able to understand that until we begin to tease out some of that deep repression around the sexualized violence that occurred to us across centuries on those plantations.
I had a partner at the time, and her ex-husband was very abusive, and she had to go out of town for a day, 2 days, to New Mexico to go to her grandmother's funeral, and she'd asked him and asked all her family members could they watch their children for that day until she could return on Sunday. They all turned her down, so she had no choice but to leave him with me. So I took her to soccer practice, then I took him to his football game. The father showed up. He physically assaulted me. While he's hitting me, he picks up his cell phone, calls the police department, and says I'm kidnapping his kids. They come and don't want to hear my side, don't want to care that he was beating on me in front of these children, took the 2 kids, put them over there with him. And when I was saying, hey, he assaulted me, I want to press assault charges, I think that he had no right to touch me, the police officer grabbed me by the jacket, threw me up against the police car, got his forearm and put it underneath my neck and said, "Shut up, you nigger dyke."
Keep one fist up. That's how we win. That's how you fucking win a war. We're waging a genocide against our people.
Tell me, those same officers are supposed to be trusted to protect black churches? There's a black man in Center Park in New York City. The principalities of power come out.
It's been so many stories in the last few months that are similar, and it's just the police get to pretty much walk away with it. I mean, it's stereotyping, and it's been something that's been going on for a while, and I just think people fed up with it. That's pretty much what happened. It just got to the boiling point.
I think it was King who said riots or protests are often the cry of the unheard.
Hands up, stop resisting, he's reaching, he's got a weapon. The gunshot wound that was felt by his mother now. Graduation picture, smile hung behind streetlights and candles. And the media will call him thug before child, thug before son, thug before scholar, but another thug brother that caused his own death with no weapon to be found.
So I would say to the young black men in Baltimore, you have every right to be angry. That life has dealt you a pretty messed up set of cards. But protest is only the beginning.
Comparing the uprising in Ferguson, I would say that the riots, the Stonewall riots, were very similar. It was, in Stonewall, we've had enough. That's it. We're fighting back. And it was just a powder keg waiting to explode. And I think what we saw in Ferguson, it was the same thing. What we've seen in Baltimore, what we've seen in many other cities, it's like, no, that's enough. We can't take it anymore. We're not going to be the victim anymore. There's a lot of critique of, here are these people in the streets, and here's this reaction and this expectation that we should be handling this calmly. Well, no, there's no way to do that. Not when one has been suppressed and oppressed all that time.
Now, what's interesting then is I often say we need to start with the things that are certainly impacting all of us. One thing that we can agree on is that regardless of your sexual identity or your gender expression, the likelihood that we would be shot by police and unarmed is twice as much as, say, your white counterparts, is the same for all of us.
And it's time for change, and you have to really bring out force to break that logjam. You know, that uprising, it has to come from underneath and come out. With the civil rights movement, there were more planned, nonviolent protests, civil disobedience. And while that is certainly a part of the uprisings and certainly has been a part of the LGBT community, sometimes things have to blow up before you can make any difference.
And I think that the current moment, whether we're talking about police brutality or another thing that's very dear to my heart and very sensitive and something about which I'm very passionate, and that is the tremendous homicidal violence that is occurring, especially in African American communities.
In so many people's minds, the issue is black men being shot down by police, not black women being victimized and violated by their black brothers, or not black, queer, and trans folk being beat down in the streets or burnt to death by folk that look like them. And part of what the push is right now that I'm hopeful about, as much as there's a bunch of virulent responses to this, is the need to say that this Black Lives Matter movement is a way to say that all Black lives matter. One cannot hold up a sign that proclaims Black Lives Matter while at the same time not making space for all Black lives, not ensure that all Black lives live and have well-being, are taken care of, and people are speaking out about that.
So about 40% of the homeless population identify as LGBTQ, and the majority of those folks are young people.
I am proudly a 28-year-old young youth category African American Black Latino woman of trans experience. Yes, we have passed one of our goals on our list, but we have a very, very long list. Don't you agree? And one of the categories on our list is something that I'm working on very strongly, and I need everyone's help. I need your help to help me and help us together as one community, one mind, and one soul to get all these young LGBT homeless youth off the streets. Get them off the streets.
I think that when you talk about like LGBT issues and Black and brown people issues or racial justice issues, like you have to remember that like there are intersections. There are brown people that are young. There are like brown people that like live at the intersection of both of these identities. So like, what about us? Like, if we're getting married, great. But if we have no place to live or we're getting abused by the cops, like this is our everyday life. Like marriage literally is one day. Like if your wedding is huge, it's one day. But after that, it's just kind of like, what next?
There is a rage, a frustration, a righteous discontent with my own tribe. I understand why people of moral conscience, and especially African Americans of moral conscience, people who are aware, people who, to paraphrase Dr. King, are not sleeping through the Great Revolution. People who are conscious have to look at the police brutality, right? And there are so many examples, not just of African American men, but of African American girls and women who have been brutalized by rogue police officers. And we are right to be enraged by this.
We're here today at Rise Up October as part of Day Against Police Brutality. This is an annual event, but clearly this year in particular, it's more heightened because of the increased police violence that's targeting our communities and more media that's lifting up our narrative that we are not safe in our homes, in our streets, in our communities, especially as lesbian, gay, bi, trans, two-spirit, gender non-conforming Black and folks of color. We are constantly being targeted for our immigrant status, for our ethnicity, for our age, for our gender expression and identity. For our homelessness, for our displacement. The more we are on the edges, the more we are pushed out.
Hell, you talk about. Hell, you talk about. Hell, you talk about. Hell, you talk about. Hell, you talk about.
In this moment, to be a convergence of politics. So at the helms of Black Lives Matter are 3 Black women, 2 of whom identify as queer. Right? Part of the long network of folk who do this work, including myself, I'm part of the Black Lives Matter network. Many of us identify as queer. Many identify as those who hold a Black feminist politic. Many are at the same time in which they're fighting against racial injustices, are fighting against patriarchy and sexism and trans antagonism and so much else. Many of whom are young and or older and have a more complex understanding of the intersection of these issues, and that is what gives me hope.
What makes it so hard to see through the color lines? Why can't you see a heart just 'cause it's on the inside? Don't you realize that we are all just the same? Same love, same hopes, same dreams, just different names.
That joy from Saturday needs to find its way in new ways, I think, into Sunday, and creating a theology that makes sense of the totality of how we use our bodies and taking the bodies out of the shadows of shame. Whether they are heterosexual or LGBT bodies, and making us more comfortable with bodies.
Why does it scare you if I love someone like me? As long as it's love, why can't you let it be? Do you think I wanna take from you something you hold dear? If you listen to me for a while, I'd only take away your fears.
What I've had to do, and I think what people like me have to do, is we have to go deep. You know, go deep inside, deep to that well, deep to our faith.
We've been down this road before, and now we're here again. Nothing much has changed except the how, the why, the when.
Where we recognize our shared humanity, and we can approach each other with openness and respect and work to move forward.
I'm looking for a movement, and sort of suggested that my view of the gay rights movement is that that's the movement that's going to take us to the promised land. and here, just as there were flaws in the civil rights movement, there are flaws in this movement that I'm identifying as taking us there. But then it is in the intersections. It is in the intersections that we will find the new world.
Absolutely.
There's so much pain, but we also have so much hope. And I think when we can gather people of hope, even if it's just a flicker, together there's more of a light. Yeah. We got it, Phil.
We think we're there. Yeah. Is that all right with you?
What makes it so hard to see through the color lines? Why can't you see a heart just 'cause it's on the inside? Don't you realize that we are all just the same? Same love, same hopes, same dreams, just different names. Why does it scare you if I love someone like me? As long as it's love, why can't you let it be? Do you think I wanna take from you something you hold dear? If you listen to me for a while, I'd only take away your fears. We've been down this road before, and now we're here again. Nothing much has changed except the how, the why, the when. I look around and see the challenge to be met. The truth is we are all one, but tell me, are we there yet? Ooh, yeah. Sometimes we fear those that we have never known. People not like us, people not like our own. But there's a deeper truth if you have the heart to see. There really is no you, no me, just human family. Oh, when we are all welcome at the tables of joy, black, white, gay, straight, girl, oh boy, the cruelty of this world will finally disappear, and love will take the place of fear. We've been down this road before, and now we're here again. Nothing much has changed except the how, the why, the when. I look around and see the challenge to be met. The truth is we are all one, but tell me, are we there yet? I wish that we could see each other for who we really are. I wish we could free ourselves from behind these bars. I wish that we could see the good in everyone and everything. Well, it starts with you and me. Can you hear me when I sing down this road before? And now we're here again. accept the how, the why, the when. I look around and see the challenge to be met. The truth is we are all one. We are one. But are we there yet? Are we there yet? Oh, tell me, are we there?
Good evening. I hope you enjoyed the Selma to Stonewall screening. And now it's time for the panel discussion of the documentary, where we explore the subject a little bit more. Joining us this evening are Marilyn Bennett, the director and co-executive producer of From Selma to Stonewall, Are We There Yet? Asa Roberts Shaw, an Afrofuturist and value-driven revolutionary. And my Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity brother. Part of our mission is providing service and advocacy for our communities, and I can't think of anyone better to bring that agenda to the table than my good brother Asa. Dr. Darnell Gooch, Jr., Dr. Darnell Gooch, Jr., the pastor of the Cathedral of Praise Church of Memphis, and queer activist Amelia León, who self-identifies as bisexual, polyamorous, intersex, and gender fluid. I was fascinated with the brilliance of the film From Selma to Stonewall, Where Are We Now? And a great starting point for this conversation is to ask Marilyn, what led you to make this wonderful film? Marilyn, you're muted.
Oh, those details. Gil and I had been writing letters, that's mentioned in the film, and just honest dialogue. There were several turning points in the film, and one was when Obama was elected in 2008. But Prop 8 did pass in California, where marriage is between one man, one woman. For a moment, there were some gay bloggers, who said that it passed because African American people came out in larger numbers to vote for Obama, but they also passed Prop 8. So and talking to Gil about that, it's like, okay, there's a lot of assumptions there from the white gay community. There's a lack of connection, a lot of taking for granted, as well. The larger one is this perception that the African American community is more homophobic. So we decided to go even more into that tension and to make it a multimedia project, which would meet more people than a book, and then the film. That's where we ended up.
Marilyn, what did you want to come out of the film?
We wanted action to come out, and the conversation to be stirred up. We didn't go with an intended audience. I mean, you're supposed to do that, and you're supposed to kind of have a script or a storyline, but we purposely kept it so that we really heard what people were saying. We didn't want them to say a specific thing. We wanted to hear them. So I would say the intended audience ended up being everyone, because there may be people that disconnect or don't feel, anything applies to them. That's something to look at. That needs to be looked at. And then others that, see themselves in the film, this is for them too. So we didn't take anything in there to say this is what people need to hear or whatever. It was a conversation, getting at the meat of the conversation. So after Obama was elected, that influenced the film. Then when Michael Brown was shot, the Ferguson uprising. I mean, there were things that happened while we were filming that totally came into the film and the meaning of the film.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so my good brother Asa, right? I got a question here. Selma was important because it was about voting rights, of course, and the exclusion of blacks from participating in the voting process. Now, the Civil Rights Act of '64 addressed that, right? Fast forward 55 years later, and in response to the 2020 election, we find 17 states passing 28 laws, making it harder for people, particularly people of color, to vote. How do you respond to that in terms of
Hey,
activism?
yes, sir. Hey, y'all. Thank you. So glad to be here with y'all to share my opinion on this very important conversation. Asa Roberts Shaw from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So I would say that that voter suppression, anti-democratic ideals, I think is just as American as cherry pie. I think that this is something that the country has shown itself to do consistently, and that this is not something opposite that or something different from what the America usually does. I think that politics, when you look at politics, politics is about power, right? And the ability to change things and influence things for your own gain or change things. Huey Newton would say that power is the idea of to be able to define phenomena and make it act in a desired manner. And when we think about power in that way, it's we kind of really understand why they're trying to suppress the vote because they're trying to consolidate power. That's the game of politics. It's let me figure out the best ways to stop your constituency from voting so that I can make sure the things that I want to pass get passed. So it's it's part and parcel for American culture.
Sounds like the more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for sharing some insight on that. Dr. Pastor Gooch, I have a question. The Black church had a profound role in the civil rights movement throughout the 50s and 60s. Does the Black church still have a place in contemporary civil rights movement? And if so, what is its role and how has it changed?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Earl. And that's a good question. I am pastor of Cathedral Praise Church of Memphis, as well as the CEO, founder of Cathedral Foundation and Tri-State Black Pride here in Memphis, Tennessee. So I want to say that I believe that the Black church has a profound role in the contemporary civil rights movement as it did in the 50s and 60s. The church in itself must continue to preach Jesus. And as we know, Jesus' mission, his ministry was centered around social justice issues. And I believe that the Black church cannot remove itself from the contemporary civil rights movement, being if the Black church does remove itself, then it dismisses the overall mission of Jesus's mission, which is in turn, again, is centered around social justice issues. We cannot preach the euangelion, which is the good news of the gospel, without preaching a gospel that is ultimately lead individuals to social justice issues. For social justice is always at the center of Christ's mission, always at the center of Christ's ministry. Jesus engaged in social justice issues. If you read the Holy Scriptures, he defended the oppressed, he stood up for women, he loved the outcasts, the despised, the rejected, and even sinners. And so to take Jesus out of the contemporary civil rights movement is to reject his overall mission and message when we do that.
Thank you, Pastor Gooch. Amelia, Reverend Caldwell said in a film that the gay rights movement is the movement that's going to take us to the promised land, but it's in the intersections. That's where we'll find the new world. What role does intersectionality play in today's social movements?
Yes, of course. So, hey everyone, my name's Amelia. I welcome all pronouns, but I prefer they, them. And in order to talk about intersectionality, we first have to talk about Kimberly Crenshaw, who's the one who coined it to begin with in 1989 in response to several legal cases that Black women had posed against the law. And she basically said that you cannot look at just their singular identities, as in you cannot look at just their Black identity, and that you cannot just look at their identity as a woman. You have to look at both together, because both identities play a part in their discrimination and their basically disadvantages in society. So intersectionality is extremely important and has to be in the forefront of any social movement that exists nowadays. So for example, you can't claim that all Black Lives Matter when you're not considering all Black lives. So if you're claiming that Black Lives Matter, but you're not taking into consideration disabled Black lives, trans Black lives, gay Black lives, all Black lives, are you really for all Black Lives Matter? You know, so when we are doing any sort of social movement, LGBT movement, feminist movement, racial justice, we have to put intersectionality in the forefront of these movements in order to build a society that's for everyone and not just a particular group.
Great. So, how have you navigated your own intersectional identity as queer, trans, Black, Indigenous person of color, and in what ways has it impacted your activism?
Yeah, so I have a lot of labels as you know. I identify as polyamorous, intersex, trans, BIPOC, Latine. I'm a mix of all my different identities. And, you know, I've navigated my life very interestingly, because sometimes I don't know whether somebody is discriminating against me because of one label, because of all labels, because of a few labels. You know, it's a very interesting thing. Because to me, like, I'm just me, you know, like I'm just a accumulation of all these labels, but to other people, they may just grasp one and just, for whatever reason, you know, interpret me in a different way. So what I usually do to kind of like navigate this intersectionality of my identities is I try to look for solace and also support with other people who also have multi identities like I do. And many of my friends do, actually. Many of my friends have just as many labels as I do, and maybe more. And also, I use this kind of mentality, like that not everyone is just has one label. In fact, like, I would say that nobody has just one label in this world. You know, people are woman and Latin and heterosexual and, you know, different sorts of identities. So no one person has just one set label. We all have a accumulation of different labels. And because of that, it's important to analyze them and see how does it influence your own personal life? How does it influence how you navigate your own life? And that's the kind of questions that I pose within my social justice work.
Thank you for that insight. Asa, piggybacking on what Amelia said earlier about Black Lives Matter, it's according to the film, it's a way to say all Black Lives Matter, right? Black Lives Matter is a way to say all Black Lives Matter. You can't hold up a sign and say that says Black Lives BLM without making a space for all Black lives. And I believe Amelia was just saying that. Do you think that the Black community recognizes queer and trans people within its ranks. And not only those who are living among us, but those that are also leading movements, right? That was pulled from the film. Does the Black community embrace queer civil rights leaders?
I mean, I think that there's a interesting question here that I've been trying to figure out, because I would say that we recognize as a Black community, when I go to my community, folks in my family and folks in my neighborhood recognizes the LGBT community in our everyday lives, because everybody has a cousin, a friend, a brother, a mom, a auntie. And especially if you unfortunately live in impoverished neighborhoods, trans women are a lot of the folks you see on the streets, unfortunately. So that being the case, the LGBT community is everywhere, and they're all throughout our families. So we recognize them, but whether or not we see them in their full humanity is another thing. I think that we're still working on that, and we need to work a whole hell of a lot harder and more urgently to get there, to make sure that we're seeing folks in their full humanity. And when we're thinking about civil rights leaders, I think that the same way that women have been invisibilized, LGBTQ folks have been invisibilized through the leadership that they've had throughout the civil rights movement and prior. I was just reading about a really amazing theoretician and anarchist named Kwesi Balagoon, who was in the Black Panther Party. He was in the Black Liberation Army, and was a really revolutionary brother, and was queer, and unfortunately died in a cage in a prison of AIDS complications. But many people don't know about him and his contribution to Black political thought, Black liberation, and how very radical this brother was and revolutionary in his thought patterns. I could speak about other folks like Bayard Rustin or Audre Lorde, who's just an amazing, amazing writer and feminist, or Angela Davis, right? Who also was a part of the Black Panther Party and is an amazing theorist and abolitionist. So I think these people don't get their due, and that we need to start changing that. But I am hopeful now. When you think about the civil rights movement back in the day, and the Black Panther Party and the Black Power movement, men took up a lot of that space. But today, queer, trans folks, women of color are really leading these movements, and not only leading them, but really pressing us forward and putting themselves out for it. So you can't not see them, which is a beautiful thing. So I'm really excited for what we can accomplish if we start to be more intentional about making sure folks get their due as people leading our movements.
Thank you for sharing that. Marilyn, your film explores several social groups, including racial identity, faith leaders, queer, straight. Was there a particular audience that you were intending to reach? You're on mute. You're on mute, Marilyn.
Oh, that happens all the time. I should have warned you. Seeing people in their full humanity. We started to film and filming and things. We knew we wanted to go to places that were significant to the different movements. So we were looking at the civil rights movement and the gay equality movement, LGBTQ equality movement. And right away it was, okay, this is a false dichotomy. We're saying that these two groups are separate groups. I mean, one, there's groups within, communities within communities, but like the obvious thing, oh, right, we know the communities overlap. There are intersections. There are many intersections held within one person. So that changed where we were going, because we because we wanted to give voice. I mean, that sounds like we had power somehow, that we were letting them talk, but it wasn't like that. We just, again, it was an organic process. And so that's where Gil got to, as far as it's at the intersections where the revolution starts. When our film came out in April 2016, those screenings after that were a conversation, get a conversation going, which is important. But in 2016 election, it changed a lot of what the film meant. And so instead of the questions about conversation, that kind of thing, it switched to, what do we do? What do we do? This person is changing everything, you know. And so then it became much, much more real to people. I have a lot of comments about white people coming into the movement thinking it was new. I could go on about that one, but what we've always done at the end of a film for a Q&A is to make sure, if we're traveling somewhere, to make sure the panel is made up of local activists and groups, because you see the film, but where does one get involved? And that's where we want to see things go.
Thank you for sharing. Pastor Gooch, the importance of remembering that religious institutions had a theology of racism was mentioned. People were convinced that races should be separate, that people of color were inferior, and that this is what God wanted. Even sophisticated folks believe that and use the theology and scripture to justify it. Is the Black church doing a similar thing when it comes to justifying the condemnation of LGBTQ people?
That's a good question. And again, I think that the church, especially the Black church in itself, has done a disservice to the body of Christ and to the LGBTQ community with its hateful theological violence, with its rhetoric that comes especially across from the pulpit. Church, and even the Black church in itself, I believe, has to apologize to the LGBTQ community as well as to individuals in the community for its horrible embedded theological interpretations and exegesis of the scripture, of the text. The Bible was centered on hospitality. And when we remove the cornerstone of the Bible, which is centered as it relates to hospitality or hospitable treatment to individuals who profess Christ, I think that we in turn do a disservice and also acts of religious and theological violence against the very people that help to create the scripture, as well as those characters, those biblical characters that we do read in the Holy Scriptures. How can we be Christian and be transphobic, right? So when you look at the scripture even states, be ye transformed. And the root word in itself, trans, that word, if we want to really be honest, it is to mean to be changed, right? And so we all are changing as we look at that text or at ourselves in that particular manner in its totality. We want to be honest, we are transforming ourselves. We're transgender because we're changing. And it is important for us to continue to ever evolve and to be the people that God has called us to be.
Thank you, Pastor Gooch. Amelia, so many movements of today attempt to do work of presenting platforms without ever really engaging people that the platform represents. Can different social movements support one another while also maintaining their own particular social justice goals?
Most definitely, and I actually encourage it. I think that so often social movements like to just kind of like go on their own and not kind of like piggyback off of others' work. But what I say as an activist in my community is, why not collaborate? Why not reach out to other people? Why not be inspired by other people's work? You know, because we're all in. I don't want to quote High School Musical here, but it is what it is. We're all in this together, and we, as a community, need to help each other achieve our individual goals. And yes, you know, we might have different goals. Like, for example, the feminist movement specifically focused.
Did we lose her? Okay.
Hello?
I'm going. Yes. Oh, you're
Sorry,
back. You're back.
that was weird.
You ended at the feminist movement.
Saying like the feminist movement is specifically about women, and that's completely okay. It doesn't.
Okay, we lost her again. Okay, I'll let her reconnect, but in the meantime, I will move to Asa. Asa, as a Black person, we're always looking for white folks who seem to get it, right? That came up in the film as well, who seem to understand us. But polls show that interest in the BLM following George Floyd sharply fell by 20% within 4 months of the incident and continues to decrease. As an Afrofuturist and revolutionary, do you seek white people who seem to get it? Or do you find it more practical in galvanizing with other Blacks and forming a collective race presence?
Hmm. I mean, I think that to start, our barometer for whether or not we're on the right side of justice or the right side of history should not be whether or not a majority of Americans think what we're doing is right. It's just, it's not, it has never been, I think, a good show of what's righteous. If you look at back in, during the times of Martin Luther King in the 1960s, those same polls would say the same thing about Martin Luther King, that a good amount of people did not believe that he was going about things in the right way, and that's MLK, right? So it's, I think that, we have to be very serious and scientific and strategic about what we're doing if we're really thinking about change. And we have to understand that we need allies, right? There's no way that just Black people can change the face of this country by themselves. We cannot do that alone. And I will also say that we also need to shift our gaze and shift our efforts towards power. And I keep using power because power is important. The ability to have power to change our situations and have some sort of self-determination is so important, because I don't think that we should be looking for allies in the sense of like, we want to find white folks that, just kind of, appreciate us or like us or sympathize with us enough to get on our side. Because I'm not really looking for that. I think that we should be past that, right? We should be trying to figure out, how do we create the organizations, the apparatuses, the institutions that give us the power to be able to do what we want and live a better life, whether or not anybody likes us, right? We need that power and that ability to do that. And that's the thing that's going to move the needle, not only for the Black community, but for the LGBT community, for women, for all of these folks, because once again, the United States, the world has shown that it will not move just on heart alone, or just on emotion alone, or just on goodwill alone. We need power. And that's where we need to be focusing our efforts in these things. And that's what we're working towards in my organization and a lot of folks, this organization.
Thank you, Asa. Pastor Gooch, the idea of theological violence in this film instead of resonating, it kind of resonated, right? Theological violence, that they seem kind of two separate ideas. Many people have contemplated taking their life because they have been taught that God hates them, right? Should that be called out, or do faith leaders have the right to preach sermons according to their spiritual viewpoints and interpretation of scripture?
Good question. I do think that individuals that misquote or misexegete the text ought to be called out because I believe that as African Americans, as LGBTQ individuals, I think we experience a whole lot of trauma already as it is. And I think that to preach a gospel that is liberating and that says it heals, I think we need to refocus ourselves on how to heal individuals in its totality and not just also be centered around gay bashing, because I think that when we gay bash, we are doing a disjustice to individuals that God have created in God's own image. And we are all creatures. We are all created in God's image. And I think that when we speak horrible and hateful rhetoric to our brothers and our sisters, whether or not if we agree with their sexual orientation or not, I think that we are speaking ill of who our creator is. I think that as preachers of the gospel, it is our job to be able to speak life, pour into individuals, whether they're black, white, green, yellow, gay, straight, trans. Our job is to inspire them and to offer hope and to allow them to be their whole person in its totality. Because as we continue to preach Christ and preach this gospel that God has given unto us, then we are yet liberated within ourselves.
All right, thank you. Marilyn, you mentioned in the film, with the civil rights movement, there were more planned nonviolent protests and civil disobedience. Sometimes things have to blow up before you can make any difference. I immediately thought of the volatile unrest that followed the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor incidents. Do you think that made a difference? Unmute. Unmute.
I do think it made a difference, and I say that just as in the what I see. Of course, I don't know what that is like to be in a black or brown body and experiencing all of that. But I've seen, and it gets back to the power, what you were talking about, Asa. I see more people of color maybe given power. I don't know. It's kind of a hard thing because it's public and it may or may not be that way, behind closed doors. But there seems to be a shift of sharing power, moving towards that. And then I always look at like what kind of commercials there are, and because that's a lot of money that corporations are putting out there. So it's like television shows. What's the storyline? The advertising. I just go back to that because that's millions of dollars thrown out there. So yeah, I think it's made a difference, but it doesn't stand alone. It has to be part of a longer path, a longer journey.
All right, thank you. Amelia, Zora Neale Hurston was quoted in the film as saying, "When you're in pain and you keep silent, they will kill you and say that you enjoyed it." That's quite powerful. What does that quote mean to you?
So, growing up, I actually loved Zora Neale Hurston. She was honestly an idol of mine. When I read "Their Eyes Were Watching God," but in reference to that particular quote, my partner has always told me, you know, they'll kill you if you do it, and they'll kill you if you don't. So you might as well do it, you know? And that's kind of like how I approach my activism now. You know, I'm not gonna lie and say that I'm not scared every time that I you know, present myself, every time that I speak out against something, every time I even like walk out my door, I'm scared for my life, because there's been many moments in my life where I have almost been killed, and it's probably going to happen many times again, you know. But I can't, you know, it's okay to have this fear, and it's okay to have a fear as a racial minority, as a gender minority, as a sexual orientation, somebody who experiences minorities of all different labels. It's okay to have this fear. But for my personal life, I can't let this fear stop me from doing what I think is right, from doing what I believe I need to do in order to exist in this society freely without having this fear anymore, for future generations to come, for people now in the present. I can't continue letting my fear stop me from organizing, mobilizing, and from changing what needs to be changed in society. So that's what really that quote means to me.
Thank you, Amelia, for sharing that. Very insightful. Pastor Gooch, why are African Americans and many in our faith communities so willing to be progressive when things relate to their politics, but seem to have a much more conservative ethic when it connects to issues around sexuality? That was pulled from the film. Would you like to address that?
Sure. I believe that the African American culture in itself is fascinated with being prophetic and progressive until you start to talk about sexuality, right? Sexuality should not be a taboo. It should not be a touchy subject to address, even in the church. Not only are we spiritual beings, but we're also sexual beings. And just as much as the African American culture or even the Black church context engages in the prophetic or engages in the progressive realm, I think as it relates to the church, we should be also prophetic and progressive when it comes to understanding what it means to be Christian, what it means to be Black, what it means to be LGBTQ. If the Black church was to remove all of those who identify as LGBTQ from the ranks of the church, I think that we will miss out on a whole lot in itself, because if you really just look at it, the ministry in itself is built around LGBTQ individuals, songs, the liturgy, the policies, and leadership that was created was centered around even some of the LGBTQ individuals that helped create what is known as the church. And even in the Black church, LGBTQ individuals, we are into arts, we're into worship, we're into music, we're into production, and so many other areas that help keeps the church moving forward. And I think that it's time that the church, especially the Black church, understands that LGBTQ individuals aren't going anywhere. We're here to
Thank
stay.
you.
Right?
Thank you. And I'm seeing now that I only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask a question, and if everyone can respond within 30 seconds, I'll ask. I'll start with Pastor Gooch, Asa, Amelia, and Marilyn Bennett. All right, so here's a question, right? When it comes to civil rights, whether queer, straight, Black, white, yellow, brown, or whatever, what gives you hope? So, Dr. Pastor Gooch, what gives you hope?
Thank you. What gives me hope is when we can all join together and be the beloved community that Dr. King once talked about. If we really, really just look at some of the civil rights leaders, those individuals, as Asa mentioned, that helped to bring us to where we are today, I think that we are still not where we really need to be. I think that for us even having this discussion today, many of us on this panel right now, we are creating room, creating spaces for individuals that will come behind us to be able to be the individuals that we once dreamed about, and to also create, as my presiding bishop, Bishop Clyde Allen III says, creating a Jesus culture, right? And so when we do that, then I think that we will, in essence, end up creating a safe space, a place.
Thank you. Thank you. Asa, in 30 seconds or less, what gives you hope? Brother Asa. You're on mute. You're on mute.
I'm a millennial, man, and I love my generation. I think that we're some of the one of the most revolutionary generations to come out of our mother's rooms in a long time. And the folks that are coming after us have an even, I think, more broader understanding of what it means to be LGBTQ, to be non-binary, just to be who you are. So I'm excited about what us and the generations after us will bring upon this country just by virtue of us getting older and starting to take over some of the levers of power. But I will say that none of this stuff will ever change unless we actively organize towards making it change, because we know how stubborn this country can be around old ideas and things that just don't work and things that we need to get rid of. So this stuff won't disappear naturally. But I'm excited about my generation and the generations after us that will be able to more easily push this forward.
Thank you, Brother Asa. Amelia, what gives you hope?
Healing gives me hope. Humanity gives me hope. I know that in my activism, I'm very trauma focused, and I work in the lens of trauma. And everybody has experienced trauma in their life. But when we actually heal that trauma, when we actually overcome it, that's when you really start to see some amazing changes. And I've actually experienced that with my own family. Years of colonization, years of, abuse and just maltreatment of my family has caused them to, unfortunately lash out. And when we actually healed together as a family, that's what really gave me hope. And that's what I hope for everyone, for generations to come, that we all heal as a society and we're able to overcome.
Thank you. And finally, Marilyn, in 30 seconds, what brings you hope?
Two things. One, one that's in process. It's the change of who is at the table making the decisions. Who are the decision makers? The more authentic diversity we have there will change. The main thing that brings me hope is that a revolution starts with two people, or even one person who talks to another and said, this is what I'm doing, this is, has a vision, and then it can grow from there. A lot of people, think, well, we got to create this big movement. No, two people can begin working an idea, so that revolution is always right there to be a part of.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Marilyn. And, we're closing out, and I do want to thank the panel for their amazing, brilliant insight. And I do want to leave this closing thought with everyone. Attempts to bring both blackness and queerness in conversation with each other have, for the most part, been a difficult feat or thing to establish. It's important to know that Bayard Rustin, an openly Black gay civil rights activist, was at the forefront of the civil rights movement, while other queer civil rights activists like Pauli Murray have gone unnoticed. Although Black queer individuals have made considerable contributions in the United States in terms of social activism, Black queerness has not become part of the nation's collective memory. But let's not forget that it wasn't white college boys at the forefront of the Stonewall protest, as many narratives suggest. What we learned, and for the sake of accuracy, is that it was queer and trans people of color, poor queers, and straight people of color who were up in arms over the criminalization and violence against them. Again, it was the people of color, queers and straight people that were up in arms over the criminalization and violence against them. Stonewall should never be told without mentioning that fact, and I'm glad that the filmmaker mentioned it tonight. On behalf of all of us at the National Pulse Memorial and Museum, we wish you peace and love and hope to see you again at the next Conversation Starter presentation. God bless.